Hey guys, welcome back. This is a story.
Hey guys, welcome back. This is a story. Hey guys, welcome back. This is a story about what if Izuku had a bone manipulation quirk with one for all. Changes occur in his life when he finally awakens his own quirk. Before we start, thank you for the support in the last video. This really means a lot to me. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and to leave a like in this video, and you can suggest a My Hero Academia fanfiction with a link in the comments if you want me to read it, and check the description for the creator of this great fanfic and support them for making this fanfic. So let's start. Chapter 7: Awakened Feelings. During Izuku's recovery. It's been a few days since the USJ incident. Since then the students were sent home to their families. It's no surprise after the pros checked on all the students. Izuku, 13 and Eraserhead were the only ones with the worst injuries, while other students only had a few cuts, but otherwise completely fine. During his recovery, his classmates would visit him or simply ask Recovery Girl if he was fine. There were also his frequent visitors, his close friends, and All Might himself. As selfish as it sounded, the symbol wanted to be the first one to thank Izuku for his actions. His classmates had explained that he willingly put himself in harm's way to protect everyone. To the point where he was basically on his last legs. His mother was informed of what went down during the whole incident, of which she responded by rushing to the hospital that day. All Might himself went to comfort the grieving mother and was prepared for any backlash that may happen. But to his surprise, Inko simply said he's always been a caring person, and if he were to do it again, he would. So don't go blaming yourself for anything. I know Izuku wouldn't want that from you. And neither would I. Needless to say, Toshinori was stunned by that. But can quickly see the resemblance between mother and son. Since then things have been relatively peaceful, while our hero went through his much-needed rest, while the students were given a few days off to give themselves time to rest as well. UA Grounds Recovery Girl's office. Laying on a medical bed, Izuku stirred before opening his left eye to a white ceiling and the smell of disinfectant. Morning already. He lightly yawned as he sat up with grunt. Looking down at himself, he wasn't surprised to find himself in a hospital gown. His arms and legs were wrapped up in bandages. And from what he can tell, his head was wrapped up as well while covering his right eye. He then lifted the gown to see that his chest was also wrapped up. Noticing a small mirror to his left, he picked it up to have a better idea of how he looked. Just as he thought, his eyes returned to their normal state. "Geez, I feel like a mummy." He set the mirror aside before testing his hands and feet to see if they were still okay. To his relief, they were, though a bit sore. Okay, lesson learned, 10% full cal for now, he thought as he reflected on the fight with Nomu. It's clear to Izuku that he grew in power, but still needed more training if he ever wants to have a better grasp of OFA. His bones may have been able to handle it, but the same cannot be said for his skin and muscles. As seen from the light burn marks and soreness that he is currently feeling. His self-diagnosis was interrupted when he heard the door open, causing him turn to his left and saw Uraraka Ochako looking at him with wide eyes. Deciding to break the silence, Izuku to speak. Good morning," he said with an awkward chuckle as he rubbed the back of his head. Snapping out of her shock, Ochako ran to Izuku's bedside and hugged him. "You're okay?" she yelled as she tightened the embrace with tears in her eyes. Deciding not to ruin the moment by screaming in pain, Izuku returned the hug with a grunt. "Geez bud, did you miss me that much?" he lightly chuckled. Ochako broke the hug and glared at Izuku through her tears. "Of course I did. Do you have any idea how we felt while you faced the villains alone?" she asked in an angered tone. Izuku shrank a bit and raised his hands defensively. "I'm sorry about that, but the thought of everyone being hurt was just too much for me," he said in all sincerity. Ochiko's glare softened after hearing that. I know, she acknowledged with a knowing smile as she wiped away her tears. She admired his selfless attitude, but like others, she did wish for him to be more careful. She wanted nothing more than to help him, but whether she liked it or not. There are certain situations where her quirk would be ineffective, and would be best to let someone else take care of the problem. So, Izuku started, breaking Ochiko out of her thoughts. Are our classmates and the pros all right? He asked with a worried tone. Ochiko then looked at him like he was insane. They are fine, just worry about yourself more, she said with a stern tone. Izuku looked reluctant but nodded in agreement. I'll try, but worrying for others is a part of who I am, he pointed out as he placed a hand on his chest, while unknowingly his left eye lit up, making him look more serious. Good enough, Ochiko smiled, happy to know that he would at least try to be more careful with himself. Though she had a feeling that he wouldn't be able to help himself in certain situations. And while you're at it, try not to look like a mummy more often, she added with a laugh, making Izuku laugh as well. After calming down, there was just one thing to be sure of. Izuku cleared his throat, gaining. Is Mina all right? He asked with a bit of red on his cheeks. Ochiko grinned as she playfully poked his shoulder. She's fine, lover boy, she teased with a giggle. Though embarrassed by the nickname, Izuku sighed as he relaxed in his position. Thanks, he smiled. At least I know she's safe. Ochiko stopped her teasing and returned the smile. Have you figured out that you like her yet? She said with an eager voice. Chuckling at her expression, Izuku nodded, making her smile grow. I thought about it for a while. And no matter how I see it, it all ends with one conclusion, he shrugged. I like her, he admitted with a content smile. He then wore a worried expression that made Ochiko worry as well. Though I admit, I am worried that she doesn't feel the same way, he said in a sad tone as she nodded in understanding. It's never easy to have those feelings. Especially when they happen to be a one-sided one, it would always hurt no matter what you do. Ochiko then placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Try not to think about it that way, she advised as he gave her his attention. I mean, it's better knowing the answer now than living your life without knowing it, she said with a smile. Izuku thought about her words for a moment before nodding his head. You're right, he chuckled. Funny, that's exactly what I told myself when I asked her to hang out with me, he said with an embarrassed face. Ochiko giggled at his expression before getting an idea. I got it. She yelled, making Izuku jolt a bit before grunting in pain from the sudden movement while she winced. Oops, sorry, she blushed with an embarrassed look on her face as she rubbed the back of her head. Izuku gently waved his hand. It's fine, just leave the jump scares to Halloween, he joked, making them both laugh. She then pointed to herself. Why don't you practice with me? Izuku confused before having a look of realization. That's a great idea. He agreed with a big smile as he gave his friend a thumbs up. The gravity teen closed her eyes and began taking in a few breaths, making Izuku look at her with a curious expression. Ochiko then opened her eyes and formed a big grin on her face. Hey Midori. She greeted with an upbeat tone, making Izuku blink. Is there something you want to tell me? She asked with the same tone, though a bit more expectant. No response came, as Izuku just gave her a bewildered look. And as he continued to stare, Ochiko grew visibly nervous. A bit of sweat started pouring down her forehead from her friend's concentrated look, which only further caused her composure to crumble further with every second of silence. Izuku's eyes then widened in realization, making her tense. She was trying to imitate Mina. He then looked away and placed a hand over his mouth, trembling with laughter while Ochiko went red with embarrassment. Hey. I know it wasn't perfect, but at least I tried. She stuttered out with a red face. Izuku then calmed down as he gave Ochako a hug, who was surprised by the sudden gesture, before returning it with an embarrassed face. He then patted her on the back, which didn't help the embarrassment. Sorry for laughing, bud. Just didn't expect you to do that, he chuckled a bit as he let her go. I was trying to make it authentic. Ochako retorted while crossing her arms with a pout which made him laugh a bit. Izuku then placed a hand on her shoulder. As interesting as that was, her blush returned. I think it's best to just do it normally, he suggested with an understanding expression. Ochako's face went back to its original color as she nodded. All right, Deku. But before that, I need to change first, Izuku suggested as he pointed to fresh clothes that Inko left by his bed. Ochako noticed as well before nodding in agreement. After changing. After removing bandages that didn't need to stay on, Izuku returned wearing his usual selection of clothes, which consisted of a green hoodie over his white shirt, that red t-shirt, and for his pants, he had baggy denims. For his footwear he had his normal red sneakers. Ochako looked at his outfit before chuckling a bit. Are you sure that isn't your hero costume? Izuku returned the grin as he waved hand. Nah, he adjusted his hoodie a bit. It isn't one without a scarf, he shrugged with a smile. His response caused her to eye him curiously. Why does it need a scarf? Izuku looked down at his outfit for a bit before looking at her with a grin. It just feels right. Ochako was confused by the answer, but decided not to think too much about it as he took a seat on the edge of his bed while she sat across him on a chair. They both straightened their postures. What do you like about me? Ochako started with a curious expression. Izuku was silent for a bit before he looked at her with a semi-nervous expression. Well, first off, I like how you're comfortable with yourself. He looked to the window on the side of the room where he got a good view of the outside. Your vibrant personality, your kindness, and your fluffy pink hair that reminds me of cotton candy, he smiled fondly. How your eyes would remind me of shining stars in the void of space. He chuckled warmly. Sometimes I can't help but be lost into them, and honestly, just by seeing your smile makes my day. He didn't get to finish as he turned to look at Ochako, who had the biggest grin he has ever seen. Izuku's face then turned red as he realized that he was more or less gushing over Mina before burying his face in his hands. Sorry, he said in a low tone, but she heard it loud and clear. Ochako then squealed much to his embarrassment before calming down. Wow, she said in awe. You're really smitten for her, she could barely contain her excitement. With his face still in his hands, Izuku just nodded. Deciding not to even deny anything, he liked Mina and possibly more than that. Did I sound creepy? He mumbled before looking up with a worried expression. Ochako shook her head without any hesitation. Not at all, you sounded sweet actually, she said with a smile. Izuku sighed in relief. That's good, he nodded before grinning big. We already have one Minator, no need for another one to join him, he said, making both of them laugh. He shook his head in amusement before stopping as a thought came to him. Oh yeah. Ochako stopped laughing as well. How long was I out? Ochako hummed in thought before responding. A couple of days. Izuku's eyes widened as she quickly added. But don't worry, Principal Nezu gave us a few days off so you didn't miss anything. That's a relief. Izuku visibly relaxed. I don't think Aizawa's lessons can help with my recovery. They both had a good laugh at that. So, when do you plan on telling her? Ochako asked with an excited expression on her face. Izuku then rubbed the back of his head. Well, I haven't exactly thought that far ahead, he grinned sheepishly as she deadpanned at him. Well, I could probably tell her while hanging OU. you don't have to. Jolting with wide eyes, they turned to the source of the voice. Only to see Mina Ashido standing at the doorway with a deep blush on her face. Seeing her, Izuku blushed a deep shade of red, wondering if she heard the things he said. While Ochako looked between the two and smiled to herself. Welp, that's my cue to leave. She stood from her spot as Izuku snapped to her with a horrified expression. See you at school, Deku. She cheerfully stated as she left the room. Now alone, the two students stared at each other for a while. It was clear they both had something to say, but didn't know how to approach it. One thing's for sure, both were certain that they might have permanently flushed faces at this rate. Deciding to break the silence, Izuku started by clearing his throat. Hi, he stood up with a semi-nervous expression. Hey, Mina replied while she staying in her position, holding the same expression on her face. So how are you feeling? She asked with a worried tone. Without missing a beat, Izuku replied. I'm fine, just a bit sore, he said with a reassuring smile. That's good to hear, Mina said with a smile of her own. There was a deafening silence again. After a bit of preparation, Izuku decided to find out and ask. How much did you hear? He looked at her with a blush. Mina wasn't doing any better as her blush deepened. When you asked, how's Mina, she said before looking down while Izuku could feel the steam coming out of his ears at her response. So pretty much the entire thing. You know. Mina started, snapping him out of his embarrassment. We never did get to hang out last weekend, she said with a sheepish smile as she looked at Izuku. Oh, right, Izuku looked down in guilt. Sorry about that, he rubbed the back of his head. Mina shook her head as she stepped closer to Izuku. It's fine, dude, I mean, you did have a reason for missing out, she said with wry grin. Izuku looked up with a chuckle. Yeah, I mean it's what I do, he said with a grin making her smile. But, Mina added as she blushed, we do still have one more day off, she said with an expectant look. Izuku looked at Mina's expression curiously. The gears in his head started turning, trying to decipher the message that she was trying to send. After some thinking, his mind landed on one conclusion. His eyes widened and his heart rate accelerated. Like a D-date. He stuttered out as his face immediately changed in color again. Yeah, Mina nodded while blushing intensely, but still managing to keep her composure. Izuku composed himself as he took a step closer to Mina. Well, I'd love to, he said quietly with a smile on his face. Mina beamed at him. Great. She cheered with a bigger smile on her face as she jumped a bit in excitement as he watched her fondly. Man, my injuries feel better already, Izuku thought as he smiled at Mina's positive energy. Well, I guess that's settled then, he said, receiving a nod from Mina. Before leaving, they decided to exchange numbers, which admittedly was a nervous experience for the both of them. Well, mostly for Izuku. UA grounds, they were about to exit the building when he was stopped by Mina. Wait, she said as Izuku turned to her. There's one more thing, she took a step closer to him. Oh? Izuku raised an eyebrow at her. What's his brain froze as she gave him a lingering kiss on his cheek. Pulling back, Mina smirked at his dumbstruck expression. I thought you were being sweet too, she winked with a mischievous smile on her face as she waved him goodbye. See you tomorrow, Izu, she said before leaving him to reboot. Once he rebooted, he began pinching himself as he began processing what just happened. He got kissed on the cheek. And not just any kiss either, it was a kiss from Mina. His face ignited as he placed a hand on his cheek where she had kissed before. A huge dopey smile formed on his face as he put his hand down. See you tomorrow, Mina, he said to himself as he shook his head with a chuckle before leaving with more stride in his step. On his way out he encountered Recovery Girl, who proceeded to scold him for his reckless behavior. After giving him one last checkup, she cleared him to go home. Midoriya residence. I wonder what I should wear, Izuku thought as he reached for the door of his home. I'm home, he yelled as he entered and closed the door before removing his shoes. When no response came, he was puzzled. How odd. He took a step forward. Guess she's dash. Izuku stopped when he heard heavy footsteps, before his mother emerged from the corner with wide eyes and teary eyes that locked onto him. He only opened his mouth before she ran at full speed towards him with tears in her eyes. Izuku, she cried as she gave him a bone-crushing hug. Oh my sweet baby boy. You had me worried sick. Don't you ever scare me like that again, she demanded while tightening the hug. Talk about tough love, Izuku thought as he struggled to return the hug. I'm sorry for the scare. He winced. But can't breathe. He gasped as his vision began to blur. Inko then looked up to see Izuku turning blue from the lack of oxygen. Oh my! She exclaimed in shock before releasing her son, who coughed as took deep breaths. Sorry about that, she said with an apologetic expression. From the ground he waved his hand. It's no problem, Mom. He stood up and stretched his back, sighing at the pop. I'm the one saying sorry for making you worried, he said with a guilty face. Inko then walked up to Izuku and gave him a much gentler hug, which he immediately returned with equal gusto. I know you want to be a hero, she said as she rubbed his back. But don't forget to worry about yourself as well, her voice cracked a bit. I know, Mom. Izuku swallowed a lump in his throat as he rubbed her back as well. I couldn't handle my friends getting hurt while I did nothing. It just didn't feel right, he said with a serious tone. Inko then let go as she stared up at her son. I know, she said with a teary but proud smile. I've heard stories from your teacher, you know, she informed as she wiped her tears away. Stories? Izuku said with a curious expression. All Might spared no detail about the whole USJ incident. He figured that he owed the mother that much, with the condition that she kept it under wraps to not elicit panic in the public. Which of course she agreed to immediately, just so she could learn about what happened to her son. Inko nodded, her smile unfaltering. Yes, how you protected everyone from certain doom. How you fought with everything you had to do it. She then reached out and cupped his cheek. Ever since you were young, that's who you've always been. Always putting the needs of others, rather than your own. And I just want to let you know that I'm proud of you for what you did and that I'm thankful for having you as my son, she said with a tearful smile as she hugged Izuku again, who immediately returned the gesture. I love you, Mom, he said with a tearful smile of his own. Love you too, Izuku, she said as she let go of the hug. Both had tears in their eyes, but had big smiles on their faces. Mule looking to their feet, they saw Temi looking at them with a curious expression. Izuku chuckled as he picked her up. Hey there, girl, did YA miss me? He smiled as she mewled in a response. Inko watched the reunion fondly before heading towards the kitchen. To celebrate your return, should we have katsudon? She asked, though already knowing the answer. I don't think that's even a question, Izuku replied without delay while giving Temi a hug, much to her happiness. Inko giggled at his response. I'll get started then, she said with a smile as she prepped the ingredients. Izuku was very excited to have his favorite meal, but then he remembered something he needed to tell his mother. And though a bit embarrassing, telling your parents about these kinds of things are a part of life. Actually, there's something else I wanted to tell you, he said while looking a bit nervous as he stroked a purring Temi. Inko continued chopping the vegetables, not seeing his expression. Sure thing. She placed the chopped pieces aside before using her quirk to grab more vegetables to chop. What is it? She started chopping again. Well. Izuku hesitated, making Inko pause a bit, worrying that it could be something bad. I have a D-date TTT tomorrow, he stammered as his face changed in color. His mom then proceeded to drop her utensils, making Izuku jump, before turning to her son with wide eyes, as she covered her mouth with both hands. My baby boy's growing up. She cried out as tears began to flow. Izuku eyed her before sighing as he placed Temi down, much to her sadness. Sorry Tem, but it's for your own safety, he looked to the cat apologetically. What followed next was a waterfall of tears, bone-crushing hugs and joyous sobbing. Date night. It's currently 5:30 p.m., and Izuku is currently making his way to Mina's house. Once the bone-crushing hugs ended, Inko went into full mother mode and proceeded to recommend places for the date. She insisted on choosing his outfit, but thankfully Izuku already came up with the best dating attire. When he shared his idea, she was more than satisfied with the results. So here he was, wearing a white t-shirt topped with a green checkered long-sleeved jacket. He also wore denim pants, with his signature red sneakers. Arriving at Mina's place, Izuku saw that she was waiting outside for his arrival. And upon approaching her, Izuku got a good look at her outfit, effectively taking his breath away, as she was clad in a white long-sleeved dress that reached to her knees. For footwear, she wore black heels. Lord have mercy, he thought as his face was set on fire from the sight before him. So entranced in fact, that he didn't notice Mina walk up to him with a victorious smile on her face before tapping him on the shoulder. I take it you like it? She asked in a knowing tone and voice. Izuku nodded dumbly before shaking his head rapidly to compose himself. You look amazing, he said with a slightly composed expression. His earnest compliment made her blush. Oh, thanks, Mina looked away. You look great too, she added with a small smile. Both then turned to look at each other with smiles on their faces. Before their moment was interrupted when the front door opened, revealing to be her parents. Mina's mother looked just like her, only with longer hair reaching to her shoulders. Like her daughter, she had pink hair and apart from her eyes, she looked like a regular person. Her father was a tall burly-looking man. He had short black hair with a pair of horns sticking out the top. His skin was white, and his eyes had a brown color to them. And based on his outfit, it seems he just came back from work. Izuku would have loved to talk about their quirks, but now was not the time. And though a bit nervous, he approached the couple. It's a pleasure to meet you both, he said respectfully as he bowed. Mina and her parents chuckled at the gesture, making Izuku look up in confusion. No need to be so formal, lad. Her father said as he placed a large hand on his shoulder, making the teen tense a bit. Recovering from his surprise, Izuku grinned. Oh, well, it's still nice to meet you, Mr. Ashido. The man returned the grin. Much better. He beamed before stepping aside to let the mother speak. So this is the boy that my daughter keeps talking about. The woman said with a teasing look that really resembled her daughter's. And at that moment, Mina decided to step in to spare herself from any embarrassment. Okay. I think that's enough introductions for now, she interjected as she grabbed Izuku's hand, making him blush. Understanding the hint, her father decided to help his daughter. All right, have fun you two, he chuckled as he turned to Izuku with a serious expression. I trust that you can keep her safe. At that statement, Izuku's eyes became serious with a light glow, surprising everyone. You have my word, sir. Unbeknownst to him, he tightened his grip on Mina's hand, making her heart rate rise a bit. Both parents smiled at his response. Good answer, the father said with a wide grin, with his wife looking on in approval. Izuku nodded and turned to Mina, not realizing that he's still holding her hand. Shall we? He said with an excited grin. Why yeah, Mina meekly nodded with a deep blush on her face as she and Izuku went on to their date. As they watched the duo leave, Mina's mother turned to her husband. He seems nice, no argument here, the lad's respectful too, the father said with a nod as they both went back inside. With Izuku and Mina were currently walking in awkward silence. At some point after separating from the parents, Izuku noticed that he was holding Mina's hand, which resulted in him becoming a blushing and stuttering mess before releasing her hand while Mina wasn't faring any better, as she reacted the same way. The pair were currently on their way to a ramen restaurant near her home. Thankfully Mina was fine with the idea, though after that the silence began. Arriving at the restaurant, Izuku walked to the door and opened it for her. And deciding to lighten the mood he said, "After you, milady," he joked in a fancy voice. Mina stared at him before realizing what he was doing as she giggled. "My, what a gentleman," she said in a fancy tone as well. Izuku smiled, happy to see that the plan worked. They both chuckled at their fun as she entered first, followed by him, both looking much more relaxed than before. Inside the ramen restaurant, they sat across each other as their menus were given by a waitress. After giving their orders, the couple decided to have a chat while waiting for their food. "So how'd you find this place?" Mina decided to ask since she hasn't been here before. Izuku rubbed the back of his head. "Well, after I told Mom about our date, she kind of went mom mode and suggested places. I eventually settled on this place since you live close by," he said with an embarrassed expression. "Well, aren't you being a sweetie?" Mina smirked with a teasing tone. Izuku's face lit up as he looked away. "Why yeah," he replied, not entirely sure how to respond to that. Mina giggled. "Relax, I'm just teasing," she reassured while resting her cheek on her palm as he relaxed a bit. The waiter soon arrived with their orders. Once on the table, they both started taking bites from their food. "Whoa, this stuff's amazing," Mina praised with Izuku nodding in agreement. Once they finished their meals, Mina patted her stomach in satisfaction. "Man, that was great," she said with a satisfied smile. Izuku nodded as he patted his stomach as well. No argument here. The couple then sat in relative silence, merely enjoying the atmosphere. "So, I have one thing to ask you," Mina said while doing her best to keep eye contact with a blush on her face. "Since when did you have feelings for me?" "Already asking the tough questions, huh?" Izuku joked with a smile, though he was blushing while Mina chuckled. Izuku then looked sheepish. "Well, since the first time I saw you," his revelation surprised her. "During the first day of school, I was more than happy to be in the same class as my close friends." He looked to the side. "Looking around the classroom that day, I could already tell that I was going to get along with everyone else as well. But then," he turned to look into her eyes. "I saw you," he said as his face felt warm. Mina wasn't doing any better, as she blushed from his gaze. "What do you mean?" Well, Izuku looked down and twiddled with his thumbs. "I just felt drawn to you. The way you have this positive energy around you. And how you can brighten people's day." He looked to her again. "And when we teamed up during the battle trials, those feelings began to grow," he finished with a blush. "Plus there was that stuff you said at the clinic, right?" the now magenta-faced girl joked. Izuku sighed, in an attempt to calm his heart. "Yep." Mina looked down to calm her rising heart rate as well. "Did you mean it?" she asked in a soft tone, but was heard by him. "Every word," Izuku stated with no hesitation, causing her to turn into a deeper shade of magenta. "Hat about you?" Izuku asked, gaining her attention. What do you like about me?" he stuttered, barely able to keep it together. Mina composed herself, as she became silent for a bit before answering. I admire your determination. He gave her his attention. Everything was stacked against you at USJ, but you still took the challenge head-on to protect everyone around you. And when we teamed up during the battle trial, I could tell that you have a strong drive to be a hero. He was floored from her words. You're also honest and open about your feelings, she finished with a smile. Izuku looked at her in awe, feeling overwhelmed by her praise. Mina giggled at his expression and shyly looked away to play with a strand of her hair. Plus it also helped that you're funny and adorable, she added with a smile, making Izuku chuckle to the side with a blush. They then looked at each other with warm smiles on their faces. At this moment, both understood where this was leading them. Both were drawn to each other for the same reasons, they both admired their personalities, and they both felt an attraction to one another. The waiter eventually arrived with the bill. Izuku insisted on paying the bill, but Mina insisted on splitting it. Needless to say, the pink teen won the battle for the bill. Outside the restaurant, stepping out of the restaurant looking satisfied with their meals. The two teens were currently wondering what to do with the rest of their evening. Mina stretched before eyeing the night sky. So? She idly checked the time. The night's still young, got any ideas? Izuku hummed in thought for a bit before looking around for a place to make the date memorable. Maybe a movie. Nah, there isn't good tonight. Plus, the nearest theater would take some time to get to without the use of his quirk, that is, but he didn't feel ready to share his teleportation secret yet. His musings were interrupted when he noticed his own shadow. Looking up, he saw the moon in all its glory. And at that moment, an idea formed in his head as he turned to Mina with a grin. Actually, Mina turned to him, curious at his expression. I'd like to bring you somewhere, she raised an eyebrow of intrigue. Where to? Izuku rubbed the back of his head as he offered a hand to her. It's a surprise, he said in a sheepish and cryptic tone. Boo, you're no fun. Mina pouted with her arms crossed. Izuku chuckled at her expression. You'll love it, I promise, he assured with a warm smile. Mina stopped pouting and looked at his hand for a moment before accepting it with a smile of her own. Lead the way. Izuku beamed at her before he led Mina to the one place where he knew would make the date special. Minutes later, can I open my eyes now? Mina asked while being led by Izuku's hand. Upon almost reaching the destination, Izuku had asked Mina to close her eyes while he leads her to the spot. The request made her confused but complied. Hang on, she heard him say. We're almost there, she can practically hear the excitement in his voice. She nodded in response, though she wasn't sure if Izuku saw it. I wonder what he has planned, Mina thought as her excitement started to creep in. She's been spending the time to figure out where was he leading her. As far as she knew, there were a few parks and a few more places, but they were pretty far from her home. So there isn't really much options. All right, we're here, Izuku finally said. Mina slowly opened her eyes, only for them to quickly widen at what she's seeing. In front of the two is a beautiful beach with soft white sand. The pale moonlight only added to the scene, making it more breathtaking. The water sparkled from the light of the moon, making it appear as if it were made of tiny stars. The only thing separating them from the beach was a metal railing. Looking to the right, she can see a set of stairs leading to the beach. Whoa! Mina whispered in, or while leaning forward on the railing as she took in the scene before her. This place is amazing. She cheered before turning to Izuku in amazement. What is this place? Izuku looked pleased from her enthusiasm and smiled. Dagobah Beach. Mina's eyes widened with a gasp. For real? She looked to the beach again in disbelief. Last I heard, the beach was supposed to be covered in garbage. She stopped her train of thought before turning to Izuku, with a curious look on her face, the latter lightly tensing from the gaze. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" "Just a little bit," Izuku admitted with a sheepish expression, as he rubbed the back of his head. Not expecting Mina to connect him to the cleanliness of the beach. "I knew I should have thought of an excuse," he mentally grimaced, but looking at her, he couldn't bring himself to completely lie to her. So he decided to come up with a response in case she started pressing on the matter. Mina fully turned to Izuku with an eyebrow raised. "Just a little," she repeated with an unconvinced tone. "Welp, here goes nothing." Izuku cleared his throat before looking to the beach. "Well, before the UA exams, I came here to train my quirk." He lightly shrugged. "It was going well, but since the beach was covered in junk at the time, I just added clearing it to my training. That way, I could train my quirk and restore the beach at the same time," he finished as he turned to see Mina's amazed expression. It technically wasn't a complete lie, he did come here to train his quirk, and wanted to clear the beach as well. But without All Might's approval, he would need to keep the details of OFA a secret, for now. "That's so cool!" Mina shouted in amazement before getting closer to Izuku, the latter blushing from the sudden proximity. "You're just full of surprises, aren't you?" she said with a purr making him blush more. Izuku swallowed. Why yeah, at this point, it didn't take a genius for him to see that she felt something for him. But there was still that little voice in his head that said otherwise. He needed to be sure. "Mina." He gazed at her with a nervous face. "Yeah?" Mina instantly responded, as she was also looking up to him with a flushed face. Izuku looked away much to her confusion. "What does this mean, for us?" he asked with a bit of fear in his voice. "Would you like a verbal, or a non-verbal reply?" Feeling his heart drop a bit and fearing the worst, Izuku turned to receive a reply. Only to realize that she was relatively close to his face with a smile on her face. Not thinking too much into it, he leaned in and closed the gap between their lips. All his worries vanished as they held each other close. It was as if electricity was flowing throughout their bodies, as their feelings for each other intensified by the second. Another moment passed, before separating from the kiss and leaned their foreheads against each other, staring lovingly into each other's eyes. "Did that answer your question?" Mina whispered with a warm smile on her magenta-colored face. Izuku lightly nodded. "Yep," he whispered back with the same smile and with an even redder face. Mina then adjusted her position and leaned her head against his chest as Izuku responded by automatically wrapping his arms around her to keep her close. Weil did the same and held him, as if he'd disappear. No words were exchanged after the gesture, both feeling content with just being in each other's arms. As they bathed in the moonlight with the serene sounds of gentle waves. Eventually though, the silence ended as a thought came to Mina. "Izuku." She called out from her current position with a content smile on her face. Izuku nuzzled Mina's hair, causing her to hum. "Yeah?" came his muffled reply. "Are you okay others finding out about us?" Mina asked as she reluctantly leaned back and looked up to him with an expectant look. Izuku looked down and studied her expression. It was clear that she didn't mind revealing that they were together now. And from what he could tell, she wasn't shy about showing her affection either. Though he knew she can show restraint if needed. He was certain that Ochako would welcome the relationship with open arms. But it's the reactions of the rest of his classmates that made him worry a bit. But then again, there wasn't any real harm as far as he knew. Mina looked down, thinking that she might be rushing into things. "It's fine if you don't want to tell them right now. I mean, I get that you can be pretty shy, so dash." Izuku shook his head. No, sorry, I was just thinking how other people would react," a grin formed on his face. Pretty sure Ochako might ask Momo to make confetti or something, he joked, making both of them laugh. I know what you mean, Mina said, nodding in agreement. I can already hear Toru squealing too, she joked with a grin of her own, making Izuku chuckle. After calming down, Izuku looked at Mina with a warm smile. You know what, he said, gaining her attention, let's go for it. Really? Mina said in surprise, not expecting the shy type to be comfortable with the idea so fast. Izuku shrugged. Yeah, I mean, if it's fine for you then I'm fine with it. Mina formed a bigger smile on her face. Plus, he quickly added with a grin, I think the only one we have to keep an eye on is Mineta, he said, making them both laugh in agreement. Mina then squealed in delight, as she lovingly nuzzled against her boyfriend, while Izuku returned the gesture with equal gusto. Staying in each other's arms until reluctantly separating upon noticing that it was time for them to head home. Hand in hand, with content smiles on their faces. Outside the Ashido residence, Mina was leaning against Izuku's shoulder as he escorted her back to her home. Looks like we're here already, he said with a bit of disappointment in his voice. As they stood in front of Mina's home, they separated from each other and looked at one another. This is a night I'll never forget, she said fondly as she placed a hand on his cheek. Izuku smiled and held the hand on his cheek. Same here, he responded while leaning into her touch. Mina then wrapped her arms around his neck, while Izuku placed his hands on her waist as they shared one more kiss, before separating with blushes and big grins on their faces. After opening the front door, Mina looked over her shoulder with a warm look. See you tomorrow, Izutilda. She waved her fingers at him as she entered her home. Bye, Izuku waved back with a goofy smile on his face as she closed the door with a giggle. He stood there for a moment before shaking away his dazed state and turned sprinting home. Yahoo! He cheered with both fists in the air before lowering them, as he continued sprinting with joyous laughter. He was pretty sure he woke up a few neighbors, but he didn't care. Inside the Ashido residence, unbeknownst to Izuku, Mina was still behind the door, and heard him have his celebration. And with a blush on her face, she giggled at his enthusiasm, before making her way to the living room. In the living room, her parents sat on the couch looking quite surprised by the sudden commotion they heard outside. But they were even more surprised to see Mina suddenly walking in with a skip in her step. Their expressions turned from surprise to amusement, as they watched her twirl in place while giggling to herself. I take it your date went well? Mina's mother rhetorically asked with a chuckle as she and her husband stood up to greet their daughter. As a response, Mina squealed as she gave her mother a tight hug, making the woman laugh. I think that's a yes, honey, Mina's father said with equal amusement, as he enveloped the giggling duo in a hug. You should invite him to dinner sometime, I'd like to get to know the one who won my daughter's heart, he said with a grin. From her position, Mina looked up to her parents who had expectant looks. I'll ask him when we're free, she said with a blush, much to her parents' amusement. We'll be looking forward to it, dear, Mina's mother said with a chuckle at her daughter's obvious feelings, with her husband nodding in agreement. Midoriya resident Izuku was currently in the same position as his girlfriend, which was in a strong hug from his emotional parent. My baby boy is growing up so fast. She cried in joy as she tightened the hug. Mom, can't breathe. Izuku struggled to say, as he saw his life flashing before his eyes. Inko snapped out of her joyful state and gasped as she put both hands in front of her mouth, effectively dropping him in the process. I'm so sorry, dear. I'm just so happy, she said with a tearful smile while wiping away her tears. Izuku coughed as he waved off her apology. It's cool, Mom. He straightened himself out with a huff. I need to remember to strengthen my bones when she does that, he stretched his back with a grunt. Are you sure you don't have a strength quirk? Inko giggled and jokingly flexed her arms. I guess I don't know my own strength, he chuckled at the display. Promise to introduce me to her sometime, okay? She said while looking up to her son expectantly. I will, he said with a smile as he looked to his mother. Inko then noticed the time. You should head to bed, Izuku, you have school tomorrow. Izuku nodded, not wanting to miss any rest for tomorrow. I will, good night mom, he waved as he walked towards his room while Inko went to her room as well. Izuku's room, what a night, Izuku said with a big smile, as he was laying on his bed with his arms at the back of his head. You should have seen it, Tem, it felt like a dream. Beside his bed, he only got slumbering purrs in response, causing him to inwardly laugh. On the nightstand next to him, his phone vibrated, catching his attention. He picked it up and smiled to see that it was Mina calling him. He took the call, eager to hear her voice. Who is it? He asked rhetorically with a grin on his face. Mina noticed his tone and decided to play along. Earthling, rejoice. For you are being called by the alien Queen, she said in her best alien-sounding voice, making Izuku laugh with her joining in. Anyways, Mina started as she composed herself. Sleep well, Izuku, she said with a gentle tone. Izuku smiled at this. Sweet dreams, he paused for a bit, making Mina curious. My alien queen, he said in a warm tone, making her giggle. They hung up after that, both with big smiles and deep blushes on their faces. Both excited to see each other tomorrow, and the possibilities of being together